Let me now welcome Mr. Adi Godrej, Chairman of Godrej Industries. Mr. Godrej, good to have you back on ET Now. Good morning, and wish you and your entire Godrej team a very happy New Year from Team ET Now.
Thank you.
We are not starting the new year on a great news, because everyone is, we've been waiting for GST with bated breath. The problem is that there is no consensus within state finance ministers. First, the GST deadline was pushed to April 2017, and now, if I connect the dots here, it appears that GST may even be pushed to August or September 2017.
Yes, let's hope it comes in as early as possible. It's an excellent reform for the country. The earlier it is implemented, the better it will be for economic growth in the country. And we have to see, I think there's a further meeting today. We have to see the progress. The earlier it comes, the better it will be.
Mr. Godrej, whereas large corporates, they have a very fine understanding of GST and the implications it will have on the supply chain and the business. But when I speak to the average owner of a SME business, a shopkeeper, someone who's a CNF agent, someone who's a wholesaler, they are feeling slightly disturbed and nervous on how GST will change life, and the implementation perhaps could be disruptive in nature. So what is your take on that?
From state sales tax to state VAT, these are smaller companies which are not fully prepared in advance, but I think everybody will take it in their stride quite well.
Mr. Godrej, good morning, and I'm sure you have your eyes and ears very, very close to all the developments that are happening. I know you mentioned that the sooner this comes out, the better. To your mind, do you think the April deadline is out of the question now, and probably we look at July with more realistic possibilities?
Well, I don't think April is out of the question. However, what you say is right. I think July 1st is probably the more likely date now.
Fair call. Now, in a manner of speaking, Mr. Godrej, is this maybe a bit of a blessing or not quite? The reason I'm saying this is a lot of people are saying, or a lot of people said in the month of December, that with all that's happened due to demonetization and a bunch of companies in the consumption space trying to come to terms with how they will, revive sales, which would have gotten impacted for certain companies. Adding to that pressure, GST in the 1st of April would have created a bit of confusion. This probably gives companies a bit of a breather to come to terms with all that's happened and then usher in GST in a proper fashion. Do you think that's a reasonable thought process or not quite?
No, I don't agree with that line of thinking. I think GST, the earlier GST is implemented, the better it is for the country. GST will add about 2 percentage points to the GDP growth of the country. Earlier such growth occurs, the better. And I think as far as the demonetization problems are concerned, they're already getting behind us. December was much better than November, and I expect January could be very good. And if the remonetization is as good as the government says it will be during January, there could be even a spurt in growth in January over the previous January, because restocking will then take place with both retailers and in people's homes, etc. And I think things will be back to normal.
Mr. Godrej, good morning. If you could elaborate a little bit more about that, and especially when it comes to rural demand, sir, because, critics believe that after a good monsoon, sort of demonetization has derailed the rural demand recovery in that sense by a good quarter or so. What is it that your channel checks are entailing right now? Is rural demand back to pre-monetization days, or do you think it will take a month or two more to kick in?
No, I think it's back to pre-demonetization days. November was a little poor because cash availability in November was poor. December, to my mind, is back to normal. The important point I made was, since November was poor, we should soon try and see that the loss of sales in November is made up, because it was not because of lack of consumption. November was poor because people used up some of the stocks that were available at the retail level and in their homes, and that will need to be replenished. and that could take place in January. So it could be that January or February, and overall the January-March quarter could be much better than earlier expected. And if that happens, then the GDP growth during this financial year would be normal.
Mr. Godrej, now there are two ways we can broadly classify your consumer business, urban and rural. Urban is looking okay, but if I do channel checks of various rural categories, whether it is motorcycles or other high volume items, one is getting a sense that there is a bit of a stress. That stress could be temporary in nature, but the stress is there. Are you also experiencing that in some of your key rural categories?
No, in December we have done well both in urban and rural markets.
So can I safely say that in your understanding, this entire fear what markets have, what experts have, that demonetization will cripple consumption, that is slightly overstretched? We should not undermine the ability of consumer to come back, and that is what they've done. Whereas it appears that there's a slowdown, the ground reality is very different.
It will work differently in different categories. In consumer durables, people can postpone purchase. It's not so critical when you need to buy a new motorcycle that it will be bought in this quarter. Similarly, appliances, etc. So there could be some postponement of purchase. Once the remonetization is adequate, people feel comfortable, that postponement will take place and overall make up for the earlier slowdown. As far as FMCG and food products are concerned, that cannot be postponed very long, and that if the remonetization, as I mentioned earlier, comes through in January, will make up for the lower sales in November, and overall over the financial year might end up at normal. Now we have to see how it turns out, we have to see how the remonetization takes place, and we have to see how people react, because there are psychological issues also, how people react to the remonetization. Are they satisfied with the remonetization?
My last question to you, Mr. Godrej, and that is on
Sure.
how you reckon the O&D quarter, and again it's a guess of course, but how the O&D quarter would have been for you vis-a-vis some of the other pure play FMCG companies. And the reason I ask is because for you, as a part of your conscious strategy, a large portion of your business comes in from the international markets as well, which wouldn't have been impacted by the note ban. Whereas in some small way, pure play domestic FMCG companies would have gotten impacted by the note ban in some way or the other. So do you think there will be a stark difference in that sense?
To that extent, to the extent you mentioned, yes, roughly half our sales come from outside India, but I am only referring to our India performance when I am talking about the demonetization effect. And whilst our India performance in November was affected, we've made up very considerably, and we still haven't finalized our numbers for the third quarter, but I expect it to be a reasonably good quarter.
Considering half of your sales, Mr. Godrej, for Godrej Consumer come from the international segment as well, just give us a color on how the international businesses have been performing.
Well, although international markets are under pressure, some international currencies are under pressure, our businesses internationally have done quite well in this financial year. They continue to do well, especially our businesses in Africa, and we are quite hopeful that our growth in this financial year will be good and even better in the next financial year.
Okay, Mr. Godrej, we wish you all the best. Look forward to interacting with you post the quarterly numbers as well, because I think this will be a really interesting quarter. But thanks for taking the time out, and a happy 2017 to you and the Godrej family.
All the best to you all too.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.